So this is session 2 of a mini-series we're calling Retool, part of our broader series, Revangelism, and we are looking at the tools that disciples and disciple makers need to be equipped with. And we spent a lot of time in session 1 of this mini-series talking about what is a biblical worldview. We didn't get into the specifics of that so much because we covered that under Rethink, but why a worldview is essential and what is a logically consistent worldview and what can we do to understand how to undermine and demonstrate, while not beating people with our morals or not being condemning or being annoying about our approach, how to undermine a worldview subtly, kind of by covert means, and demonstrate to people that what they believe isn't nationally logically consistent. And when you do that, you create a void in their life because these suppositions have kind of been eroded, and you open up doors. You will see opportunities come to pass where you can offer them the truth that you know as a biblical believer. So that is where we start. Well, the first step to winning the battle of worldviews is having a strong apologetic. And apologetics is a term. It doesn't mean saying that we're sorry. It means giving a defense of something, giving an argument in defense. And so apologetics from a theological standpoint or from a Christian standpoint, it says giving a defense of the Word of God. We want to remember that Peter, in one of his letters, what he tells us is to be ready always to give a reason for the hope that is in us. And we've seen over and over again that there are tons of Christians out there that believe things, but they don't even know why they believe things. And we need to have a strong defense argument for what we believe. Is our faith a shield of defense against the enemy's attack, or a wastebasket we file all things we don't understand in? Because according to Ephesians, our faith needs to be a shield. It's not something where we just put things we don't get. It's something we hold up, and it says it will quench the fiery darts of the wicked one. It will put them out and prevent them from reaching us, prevent them from breaching into our inner man and corrupting our thinking and causing us to question and question's not even the right word because you don't want to seem closed-minded, but to have our understanding and our faith in the Bible undermined by the lies of the enemy. Because, see, while we're going to speak the truth, the enemy loves to lie. And he loves to come up with arguments that are not true. And when he does that, and they're always based on incredibly faulty logic, like we demonstrated in the first session, we want to be able to make sure that we're coming back to the ultimate standard of truth. And we said last time that an ultimate standard of truth is a standard of truth that doesn't have to appeal to any other truth claim, any other truth argument, because if it does, it's obviously not the ultimate standard. Okay? So what is our faith? How do we do that? Well, a genuine disciple can give reasonable answers to the origins debate, to the question of origins. And it's important to realize that when it comes to creation versus evolution, we're dealing with a very specific term because people love to confuse these two terms. They like to confuse observational science and origin science. Now, observational science is what we, in the modern world, like to apply the scientific method to. We can observe something, so if we can observe something, we can create a hypothesis. We can create an experiment to test the hypothesis, and based on the outcomes of that experiment, we can re-perform the experiment again and again, and with the duplicated efforts in that, we can come up with what we would associate as a scientific law. That's what we call the scientific or the empirical method. Okay? The problem with origin science is not observable. Nobody was around, despite some of our older members here who may have been close, during the origin of the world. Nobody was there. And because nobody was there to observe it, we have to make presuppositions on how we got here. Now, the primary evolutionary presupposition is the presupposition that the present is the key to the past. It's called uniformitarianism. Now, I know I'm using some big terms, but pretty much all that means is things happen today and in the past, or things happen in the past at the same rates that they happen today. So if something takes time, water going through a canyon takes so much time to erode so much rock, then obviously it would take, calculating backwards, millions and millions of years at the present rate to accomplish the carving of the Grand Canyon, for instance. Okay? And that's the underlying principle of most evolutionary thought. The present is the key to the past. Same rates, same times. But the difference is, the creation standpoint says, no, that's not necessarily true. There could have been moments at key points in human history where catastrophic events took place that caused what we see as present rates and conditions to have been vastly accelerated, such as a global flood. If there was a flood that covered the entire world and there was sediment moving because of that flood, you could have seen fossils created not in millions of years, but literally in about 150 days. Okay? You could see these things happen. Okay? They're big differing viewpoints on how we got to the world that we have, and a lot of it does have to do with the age of the earth. Now, evolution claims that once upon a time there was a monkey, and that monkey, over millions of years, became a human being. They actually go further back than that because they say once upon a time there was a bunch of galactic soup, and this primordial soup pretty much eventually became an amoeba and gathered what it takes to have single-cell organisms. They perpetuate this myth of the simple cell when there is no such thing as a simple cell. Cells are incredibly complex things. And that those simple cells split and multiplied and became more complex living organisms, and eventually you had a fish, and officially that fish grew legs and came up on land, and they have no scientific evidence to actually back this up. They try to perpetuate that there is some. They try to indoctrinate us to thinking that there is some, but there really is no evidence for that. Okay? The problem with that is the biblical view says that all things were created perfect. They were all created very good. There was a sin that took place, and that caused a curse of consequences to be put on this world, and that led to man's death. The dichotomy of the two views is really through death and millions of years, suffering, disease, and bloodshed, we went upwards and got to man's existence today, whereas with the creation account, we started out perfect, very good, something happened, we became decrepit, we became falling apart, we were broken, the world is spinning out of control, there's death, there's the disease, there's all of those things, and it took a restorative process in order to bring us back into the way God originally created us to be, and that happens to be the completed work of Jesus Christ. Now, that's important because if the evolutionary worldview is true, the entire biblical process of transformation that we outlined for you obviously wouldn't matter. It wouldn't matter. Because according to evolution, death, disease, destruction, suffering, all of those things made us better. And we know that that's not the case. We know that that's not the case. Now, I've got to cover a lot of this stuff pretty lightly this morning because I just want to give you guys an overview. But the origins debate can debunk the myth that faith and science are mutually exclusive. See, in the world out there, people think that science adjusts its views based on what's observed. And then they'll look at faith, and what they'll say is faith is the denial of observation so that belief can be preserved. In other words, to have faith in something, you essentially have to plug your ears and say, no, I don't see that. I have to believe in what the Bible says. And they think that that's how Christians really function. They think that we ignore observable science in order to perpetuate our irrational religious beliefs. A great character in TV to just look at the extreme views of the humanist, irrational, evolutionary standpoint is to watch has anybody ever seen the TV show on Fox called Bones? Okay, she's a forensic anthropologist. She's a materialist, an empiricist, and she's also incredibly socially awkward because she believes in nothing besides this evolutionary worldview. Okay, and watching a few episodes of that, logging on to Netflix, whatever, all the seasons are there, whatever you want to do, it's actually a good exercise in stripping away all the niceties of social norms, because that's what they've kind of done with this character, and letting you see the underlying presuppositions of how a person with these worldviews thinks if it's extrapolated out to its ultimate conclusion. So that can be a really good exercise for some of you. Now, the unbeliever's perception of believers is what I've showed you on the screen, and it's our fault that they have it. Most believers cannot rationally defend the Bible's claims against the theory of evolution, and so unbelievers assume that because believers can't rationally defend it, there must be no rational defense. Now that was key. I'm going to say it again. Unbelievers assume that because believers cannot rationally defend the creation worldview, that there is no rational defense for it. Now that's a flawed argument, because the absence of an argument to defend it is not the absence of an argument that can defend it. It's a lack of our ability to do so. But that's where they're at. In fact, on that same show, in season 8 or season 9, whatever was just released, they put on the air a character who was supposed to be a creationist. And they ripped this guy up and down because he was crazy enough to believe that the world was created in 6 days. And the guy came across as an extreme jerk. That's how they portrayed him. Arrogant, no good arguments for what he believed in. And we can't be mad that that character is represented in the media, because I guarantee you the writers of those shows have encountered Christians who weren't able to back up what they believe. So this morning isn't a teaching on creation versus evolution. It's a reminder to you that to be properly equipped and to properly to disciple others, you need to be able to give rational defenses on the origins debate. That's the responsibility of a disciple. Does that make sense? Okay? That's part of what you have to do. Now, the flip side of that is disciples that are educated about the scientific accuracy of the Bible are taken more seriously by unbelievers. A lot of times it astonishes them. And Romans 1:20 says, "For the invisible attributes, namely his eternal power and divine nature, have been clearly perceived ever since the creation of the world in the things that have been made. So they are without excuse." The Bible makes the claim that the world around us is evidence of the existence of God. Can you use the world around us to prove that there is a designer? That's a mandate upon you, because it leaves the world without excuse. Make sense? Do you have those tools? Are you going to a church that is equipping you with those tools? If not, we're here Sunday mornings, 10 a.m. Right? 2 Timothy 6:20 says, "Guard and the deposit entrusted to you. Avoid the irreverent babble and contradictions of what is falsely called knowledge." See, the Word of God has been deposited on the inside of us, and we got this awesome responsibility to guard, to protect it, and not to get lost in these babbling arguments that are falsely called knowledge. And that's why sometimes, and this isn't directed at anybody, because all of you have done it at one point or another, but say, well, you need to talk to this guy, or you need to go online, you need to talk to this guy. We also have to remember that as disciples, if there is no sign of hunger in a person that you're talking to, you're not obligated to approach them. You're not obligated to go after them. The Bible taught us that if they wouldn't receive the truth, kick the dust from your heels and walk away. Now, the only time I ever find myself approaching somebody who isn't hungry, and I can tell that they're not hungry, is when I am defending people that are influenced by that person's teaching. Somebody who posts something on Facebook and their followers are going to see no rebuttal against what that person said. Then I'll feel the need to step up and to say something. Okay? But that's different. I don't necessarily think I'm going to win that guy who posted whatever he posted, but there needs to be a rational defense, because they could well make that assumption that because no one gave a rational defense of it, that there is none. Does that make sense? Okay? And we're obligated. We have to do that. Every claim the Bible makes about science is not only true, but crucial for fulfilling in the blanks of our understanding about the origin of the universe, the earth, fossils, life, and human beings. The more we study and learn about the world, the more we come to appreciate the Bible's flawless and supernatural character. The Bible never claims to be a science textbook. Nevertheless, the Bible claims to be, in Psalms 119:60, true from the beginning. And so if it is true from the beginning, then all of the scientific claims that it does make, a few of which we'll look at in a minute, must be true. Does that make sense? So we can't disregard it, or we're disregarding some of it. Remember, there's no neutral ground here. Indeed, this is one of the ways that the Bible's authenticity can be tested. Christ himself, the Word of God, who is the author of all Scripture, asserted that we should be able to believe everything he says about earthly things. He says this in John 3:12, and this is an important concept. In John 3:12, he says, "If I have told you earthly things, and you do not believe, how will you believe when I tell you heavenly things?" How can we believe everything he's going to do in the invisible realm about our spirit being born again and our soul being transformed and all of that stuff that we talked about when we talked about biblical transformation, if we don't believe him when he makes claims about the world that he says he created? That's what he's essentially saying. Now, what do we got to do with that? Well, that gives us some problems, because there are a host of people who call themselves Christians who make the mistake of trying to fit what modern science says about long ages of the earth and evolution and all of these things into their beliefs about the Bible. Again, they try to find neutral ground. They call it theistic evolution. They call it the gap theory. They try to squeeze long amounts of time between Genesis 1:1 and Genesis 1:2, or they try to say that the 6 days of creation weren't really 24-hour days. But see, the issue is what Jesus is confronting that. He's saying, look, I've told you about earthly things. If you don't believe that, then how would you really believe me about heavenly things? So it does draw a line in the sand for us where it puts us at opposition against believers, not disciples, but believers who have claims about the Bible that try to fit erroneous humanistic science into it, and it forces us to have to stand up and say no. Because if we don't believe what God is saying on all the claims he makes about physical earthly science, we're abdicating our hope in supernatural transformation. And I'm not willing to do that. I don't know about you guys. I'm not willing to do that. Scientists have run into all sorts of interesting questions about the physical and biological processes that produce the world we see today, but they are limited to observing, testing, and experimenting with present processes and creatures. They can only guess about the past based on fragmentary evidence and biased assumptions, which they cannot scientifically prove or disprove because they were not present to observe what happened in the distant past. In other words, they must rely on their preconceived beliefs about the past. On the other hand, God, our eternal creator, who has all knowledge, was present when he created the universe. He has revealed to us in an eyewitness account, the Bible, what happened in the past to produce what we see in the world today. The Bible explains when God intervenes supernaturally at key points in history in ways that affect what astronomers, geologists, biologists, and anthropologists study. Without this record, we would be in the dark about these events, but with it, we can understand the world we see today. Let me give you a few examples. Isaiah 40:22 and Proverbs 8:27 says, the phrase, the circle of the earth. That's kind of interesting because I seem to recall prior to 1492 and Columbus taking off to prove that he could find a path to sail around the world, they thought the earth was flat, that you'd fall off of it. And here the Bible's describing the earth as a circle thousands of years before Columbus was ever born. Interesting. What about Ecclesiastes 1:6 through 7? If you read that verse, and again, I'm not going to take the time to do it this morning, but that verse is talking about wind currents, and it's very specifically speaking about the hydrological cycle. He says that the oceans flow into, or that the streams and the rivers flow into the oceans, and that the oceans are not full. So where's the water go? Step back from our own understanding that we have because of evaporation and the way God returns water to the earth and all of precipitation and all of that stuff. If you're reading this back when Solomon is writing, what did they know about all that? How did they understand it all? The Bible's making a claim that I swear to goodness our average weatherman can't get right. They installed a new piece of highly technological equipment up here, though, next to the Doppler radar. It's called a window. Job 26:7 says that he stretched out the void and hangs the earth on nothing. Now, I want you to remember for a second, Job is probably the oldest book of the Bible, even older than Genesis itself. Ancient cultures believed that the earth sat on the back of 4 really big elephants who stood on the back of a giant turtle. This is what they believed. What did the turtle stand on? That's simple, my dear. The turtles just went all the way down. It's the way somebody rebutted that one time, honestly, real life. What did the turtle stand on? They just went all the way down. All the way down to what? I don't know. Okay? But here in Job, thousands of years before NASA or Sputnik or, all of these pictures that have come from the earth, from space, what do we see? The earth was hung upon nothing. How did Job know that? I guarantee you, he never walked on the moon. How did he know if it wasn't inspired? What about Psalm 8:8? Psalm 8:8 mentions something called the paths of the sea. And a man from the Navy by the name of Matthew Murray read that verse about the paths in the sea, and being a Christian and believing he could take God at his word, he went out on an expedition, and he is the first person who ever charted the ocean currents. They didn't even exist before Matthew. They didn't even exist in our knowledge base before Matthew Murray discovered them. But Jesus, when he wrote the Word of God, John 1:1, said there are paths in the sea. Last I checked, there weren't no floating road cones that could show you those paths and those currents for somebody to figure out. And based on that scripture, a man dedicated his life to finding them and was not disappointed. What about New Testament? Colossians 1:17. Colossians 1:17 makes the claim that God, or Jesus himself, holds all things together. Fascinating. Bet you didn't realize that verse had anything to do with quantum physics. I'm about to demonstrate that it does. We live in a simulation. A digital simulation of the world of a much bigger reality. Because if I were to take this chair and I were to wheel it out here, and I were to say that this chair is more empty than it is full, and you were to say, well, actually, it's a solid object, Did you know that I would be more right than you are? Because of the space between atoms, particles, and quantum particles, there is actually more empty space in this chair than there is actual physical substance. What we feel is a simulation of solidity. When you go and you take a look at, and again, I don't have the time to go as deep into this stuff as I want to, but the space between the nucleus of an atom and its electrons by scale is something akin to the space further than between the planet Earth and the moon. That's how much empty space there is between by scale. It's unbelievable. And then when we start getting down into these quantum particles, leptons, and quarks, and all of these tiny little things they make up these funny names for, they get down into it, and they can't figure out what holds them together. So scientists, you got bosons and leptons and all these funky things. Scientists comes up with this term for something they haven't discovered yet. It's really fancy. They just called them gluons because they hold everything together. Glue, right? Can even make sense to the kid who used to eat paste in 3rd grade. I could name him, by the way. Scientists continue to experiment and look for these invisible particles that they can't find called gluons. And Colossians 1:17 says, He holds all things together. We're spending billions of dollars to find evidence of these particles that we can't find, and I guarantee you they can't find it because it's a fulfillment of Colossians 1:17. It's literally the power of God holding these quantum elements together. That's pretty cool when you think about it. It's pretty cool. So understanding a literal Genesis is important because it eliminates microscopic fractures, microscopic fissures in the foundations of our faith. We can look at the field of astronomy, and we can see that Genesis says in 22:17, in Jeremiah 33:22, that the stars are innumerable. Do you know it wasn't that long ago, only about a couple of centuries ago, that they thought the stars were numbered at about 300? Because with the naked eye, if you looked up at the night sky, that's about how many you could count. And then they got better optics. And they began to be able to see that there were thousands. And then they'd be able to get even better telescopes. And they would be able to see that there were millions. And then billions. To the point now where they are innumerable. In fact, in the field of optics, there's a term that's called resolving power. And resolving power is you can take a telescope, you can go down to your telescope store, you can spend a little bit of money, $300, whatever, and you can point it at a star, and it'll look really bright. But if you go down to your store, and there's one downtown, you spend a whole bunch of money, you spend like $5,000, $6,000 on a telescope, and point it at the same star, you'll be able to determine that it's not one bright object, it's actually two, that there are binary stars. And the resolving power in optics shows us that there is more behind the scenes based on what we were able to see. So what I want to know is, how did Moses, writing Genesis, and how did Jeremiah, writing his books, thousands of years before modern optics, make the claim that the stars were innumerable, when all they had was what they could see from the naked eye? Who knew? Not only that, but do you realize that the Bible also makes the claim that God knows the name of each and every star? That just makes me wonder, because I always hear about these things where, like, for Valentine's Day, if you want to be cheap and not actually, get your girl a diamond ring or something like that, you can name a star after her. I wonder if that ticks God off at all. I'm just curious. I didn't name it Karen, you moron. I don't know. It's just me. Just me. 1 Corinthians 15:41 says that stars differ in glory, and we know that stars have differing magnitudes and differing brightnesses. Jeremiah 31:35 says that stars follow a predictable pattern. And we can take the look at the zodiac for that. Those 12 signs follow an elliptical orbit, and we see the same stars at the same time in the same season every year. Okay. Absolutely. What about, we said Isaiah 40:22 and Psalm 103:12 also say that the earth is round, not flat. We looked at where Job says the earth hangs on nothing. Scientific evidence gives us a lot of proof of a young universe. Spiral galaxies, the fact that they are spiraling out, they can calculate approximately how long it would have taken them to reach, to rewind them and take them back to where there was nothing there, to where it was just a dot, and it wouldn't take millions and millions of years. Because if they keep expanding at the rate they're expanding, they wouldn't be spirals, they'd just be nebulous fields out in space. That's the big discovery of the 20th century, by the way. The fact that the universe had to have a beginning. I'll just postulate on this for a morning, but we as Christians, we get so upset about the Big Bang Theory. And that's not just because there weren't any new episodes on. We get so upset because we think that it's an argument for evolution. Do you realize that as a Christian, you should be able to use the Big Bang Theory as an argument for creation? Prior to the Big Bang Theory, evolutionists believed that everything just went back into an infinite past. It wasn't until we started to hit the early 20th century where they looked at things like spiral galaxies and missing nebulas and all of these other things that they were looking out at that they realized that at some point the universe was wound up and now it's expanding and it's spreading out. And so logically, rationally, there had to be a moment, if you rewind it, if you pull it all back, where it was all together. And there is virtually no scientist today that believes in an infinite past. They all have to come to the conclusion that the universe did, in fact, have a beginning. Now, forget the fact that they say that it was 14 billion years ago or whatever. They have made a massive shift from infinite eternity past to there had to be a beginning. Well, that's funny, because what you used to believe and what you believe now is more in alignment with what I've believed since Genesis was written. Again, you can show that their worldview is logically inconsistent. I didn't need to see evidence of the universe being wound up to know that it's only been around since God created it. I believed it in the book because it had it right, when most cultures prior to the 20th century believed that it just went on and back infinity and forever. But we now have fundamental evidence that the universe has been wound up. We just got to get them a little bit closer. Nobel Prize-winning physicist Arno Penzias said, "Astronomy leads us to a unique event, a universe which was created out of nothing and delicately balanced to provide exactly the conditions required to support life. In the absence of an absurdly improbable accident, the observations of modern science seem to suggest an underlying, one might say, supernatural plan." Isn't it nice when our Nobel Prize winners almost get it? In geology, you've got the water cycle. Ecclesiastes 1:7 we talked about. Isaiah 55:10 also hints at it. The sea current, Psalm 8, we've already seen that. Genesis 7:11 says the foundations of the deep were broken up. We have evidence that there were waters under the earth that erupted. The Bible knew. Scientific evidence of a young earth from geology. Continents erode too fast. Too much mud on the seafloor. Too much sodium in the ocean. Too rapid a decay in the Earth's magnetic field. All of these say that the Earth could only be about 6,000 years old. I'm not taking the time to explore every one. I'm trying to remind you that if you do your own study, and you should spend time thinking about these things, meditating upon these things, studying these things as part of your everyday life, your every week life, or at least once a month. To understand that science really does back you up. Because you should have an answer. What about biology? You know, the second law of thermodynamics is used in every field of science except biology. Because the second law of thermodynamics is the law of increasing entropy. And what that means is things have a tendency to go from order to chaos. Barring an outside influence of some kind to reinsert more information into a system, things go from order to chaos. I'll give you an example. If I take a car, no, better example. If I take Dane's room, and we leave Dane's room unattended, remodel my house and put all my boxes in there, and then give me time. If we do that, and we leave it there, a car left in a field for 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, what would you expect? Would you be able to walk in like you did the day that that car was new in the dealership and start it up and drive it away? Of course not. It would rust. The rubber hoses would corrode and break and snap and become brittle. Electrical contacts wouldn't work anymore. The lubrication, the oil itself would break down. The pistons would seize. And without intervening information, a mechanic keeping it up, doing his job, changing the oil, keeping it running, all of those kind of things, eventually a car will wear out. But when it comes to biology, we assume that given enough time, a cell will become more complex and more complicated and develop more complex, by the way, irreducibly complex systems that all have to function together and that all have to be in existence at the same time in order to support each other, but somehow they'll evolve independently. And we ignore the second law of thermodynamics when it comes to biology. Now, beyond that, the discovery of DNA was the final nails in the coffin of anybody who legitimately believes in molecules to man evolution or chemicals to chemist evolution, because the problem is biology is utterly inundated with information science. Because if you study genetics and you study DNA, there is a blueprint that is completely and utterly embedded in every one of your cells. And not only can that blueprint reproduce each cell, it can reproduce everything in your body. You are completely recreated, and yet we would say that that information all got there by accident. That would be like saying that the house I live on got on the top of that hill by accident. And nobody would ever believe in their right mind that that happened. Nobody. So can you defend the existence of a creator? Disciples need to be able to do this. Disciples need to be able to do this. A few more thoughts before we wrap this one up. Next week we're going to take a look. We're going to refresh our minds on the inerrancy of Scripture, the manuscripts, what we know about textual criticism, how we know that the Bible really is the Bible, and we're also going to take a look at how we know that Jesus really is who he said he was, because those are two other really key portions that you, as a disciple, need to be equipped with. But when it comes to this stuff, again, I want you to remember that we're not debating evidence for evidence. We're debating a worldview versus a worldview. So in the next few minutes, I just want to take everything we've talked about in this session, without going into all of those details and all that stuff that we could just mount up so much evidence. Do you understand how to take a person who denies the existence of God and make them confront the irrationality of their statements about their own beliefs, their own worldview, by saying, where did the information come from? When it comes to mitosis, the process of cell division in a new life form, when a mom is conceiving a child inside of her womb, those cells, they begin, one cell becomes 2 cells becomes 4 cells becomes 8 cells, and they begin to multiply. And eventually, as you watch that process under a microscope, you will begin to see a black line start to form, and that black line becomes the spine of the fetus, the baby. The question becomes, when it comes to these stem cells, because, everybody's into researching stem cells, Stem cells have all the information to become any type of cell in the body. That's why they want to do the research on it. But what they can't find is where the cells get the information about what kind of cell to turn into. How does this cell become a heart cell? How does this cell become a skin cell? How does this cell become a muscle cell? How does this cell become a nerve cell? These stem cells, they all have the components. What it would be like is this. Let's imagine for a second that I took the world's greatest musicians, and these musicians were phenomenal. They didn't skip out on piano lessons at about 15 like I did. They learned how to play every instrument on the planet. And I'm talking even the weird, goofy stuff from other countries that, we don't even recognize as instruments. They know how to play it all. Everything. Can play piano, trombone, guitar, all of it. Each and every one of them. So every musician that you've got, 100 musicians, can play every instrument. And then you provide every instrument. Now beyond that, each of these musicians knows every piece of classical music ever written. Beethoven, Tchaikovsky, Mozart, Chopin, all of them. And they can play it from memory. It's like embedded in them. And you get them all in a room. You've got all of that information. And you still don't have an orchestra. Because the problem is, who decides who's going to play the violin? And who decides who's going to be the brass section? And who decides who's going to be first chair? And who's going to be second chair? And who decides what piece they're going to play together? Because if they try to play all the pieces at once, it's just going to sound like noise. You see, no matter how talented the musicians, or how much music they know, or how much access they have to each and every instrument, without a conductor, all you have is chaos. Someone has to make the call. And I assure you, when it comes to the body, when it comes to the division of those cells, the God who says he knows the number of hairs on your head, and for those of us in this room whom that is not a miracle for, he knows your fingernails. He knows you by name. He's the same God who's saying, that cell over here. That cell over here. That cell is going to be part of the foot. That cell is going to be part of the lung. That cell is going to... Does that kind of blow your mind? They can't find it. No matter how hard they try, no matter how deep they look, they can't find the part of the DNA that does that because it's not there. Because it exists the same place those gluons exist. Now, I want to back that out so we walk away with a little bit of awe and a little bit of oh my God, you're so amazing tonight. You're so awesome. we question whether or not he can heal us. We question whether or not he'll heal a broken arm, or he'll deal with an upset stomach, or he'll rid us of cancerous tumors. When every day of your life, God is directing which cell becomes what. Conducting the very duplication of your process on the inside of you. This is the God who says, if even a sparrow falls to the ground, I know it. And how much more do I look out for you? How much more do I watch you? See, why is it important that we are disciples and disciple makers? Because all of the worldview debates in the world won't matter. Unless you get to that point, that moment in somebody's life where there's an emptiness, where there's a part in them that's hurting and they need an answer. And it doesn't matter how broken they are. It doesn't matter how much academic thinking they have on the inside of them. There comes a moment where they're alone and it's the middle of the night and the moonlight's shining through the Venetian blinds and they're staring at the bottom of a bottle of vodka. And you know what? All they want is to know they're loved. So you're not doing it to prove them wrong. You're doing it to prove they're loved. That was good. I'll say it again. You're not doing it to prove them wrong. You're doing it to prove to them that a God who would do all of that loves them enough to take them out of the everyday stuff that philosophy can't help, that Nietzsche's not going to give them a hand with, that Freud's too busy being messed up with his own mom to figure out. They don't know where the real answers to the question that really matters, like am I going to lose my job, or am I going to lose my wife, or are my kids going to die of this disease that they shouldn't have at this age, and why would a good God allow? See, that's where most of it comes from. Do you know why Darwin abdicated his wife's Christianity? He abdicated his wife's Christianity and wrote The Origin of the Species because his little girl died of a disease and they said that God was sovereign, so why didn't he heal her? He fundamentally changed the world that we live in for the worse, because nobody could show him beyond a reasonable doubt that a good God with an inviolable character and a nature that's consistent from Genesis to Revelation really loved him. As much as we talk about all of this stuff, never forget why you're in this fight.